PHP isn't an email program, but it does have a function called mail, which hands an email message to the web server's mail transport agent. To prepare for sending the content of the feedback form by email, we need to set up a series of variables that will be passed as arguments to the mail function. In this video, we'll deal with values that are specific to a particular project, so they need to be defined in the same file as the form. In our case, that means contact.php. And the arguments need to go before we include process_mail.php. So I'm going to add a new line on line 7, and the first argument that mail expects is the recipient of the email. So I'll call that to, and then it's just a string that contains an email address. If you want to prettify the email address by adding the person's name, you put the person's name first. So before david@example.com, I'll put my name, and then the email address itself goes inside a pair of angle brackets. And if you want to add more than one email address, separate them by commas. The second argument expected by the mail function is the subject line of the email. So on the next line, subject, and this will be a string, feedback from online form. The subject shouldn't contain any new line characters, it just needs to be a single string. The third argument is the body of the email message, which must also be a single string. Our current form has only 3 fields, so it would be quite easy to concatenate them, but forms often have many input elements, so we'll come back to building the body of the message later in this chapter and automate the process. So the first 3 arguments, the destination address, the subject line, and the message body, are required, but the mail function also accepts 2 optional arguments, so let's initialize variables for them. So the 4th argument that I'm going to create will be for additional headers, and I'm going to initialize this as an empty array. Each header has to be separated by a carriage return and new line character, so if we create an array, we can then join the array elements using the implode function. Every email should have a from header, so we'll create that first. So headers, then an empty pair of square brackets, we're adding to our array, and then a string from and a colon. And this should be an email address on your own domain. Don't use it for the email address submitted through the form. We'll look at the correct way to handle the user's email address in the next video. So this will be from webmaster@example.com. And if we want to send a copy of the email to another address, we can also create headers for CC and BCC. So headers, and we'll create this one as CC, so CC colon, and then another at example.com. And if you want to have more than one email address in the CC or BCC, separate them by commas. It's also a good idea to create a header to set UTF-8 as the encoding. Now arguably this is a generic header that could go in the external file with the mail processing script, but you might need to send mails with different encoding, so I think it's probably a good idea to put it in the same file as the form. So another header, and this one will be content-type, followed by a colon, then text/plain, semicolon, and then char set equals UTF-8. And setting the encoding like this to UTF-8 will ensure that accented characters and non-alphanumeric characters are handled correctly by the email. So I think that's all the headers that we need that are specific to this particular form. So all we need now is the last argument, the 5th argument. This is a security measure to stop spam by ensuring that the mail comes from an authorized account. So we'll call it authorized. But it's not always required, so we'll initialize it simply as null, the keyword null, so no quotes around it. We'll come back to that later if we need to change the value to a specific value. So we've now initialized the main variables that will be used to send the form content by email. In the next two videos, we'll continue building the generic mail processing script, automating the reply to header, and building the body of the message.